Alright, welcome back, Sebastian here. So today I'm going to be doing my preview for the 2025 Singapore Grand Prix. Obviously I'm recording this a lot later than I usually would. Usually this video would have come out either yesterday or even 2 days ago. But been busy the last couple of days, so instead we get it today. And qualifying race haven't started yet. As we're recording this video, it's about 3 to 4 hours before the start of FP3, so still have a little bit of time before we get to the important stuff, which of course will be from quali onwards. So first, taking a look at your circuit layout, of course this is around the Marina Bay circuit, the only circuit we've been really in F1. Although that being said, they did have the Singapore Grand Prix at Thompson Road in the 60s, although of course that was not an F1 race. So getting back on track, so sector 1 is really your main straight, and then going into that turn 1, 2, 1, 2, 3 complex. Turn 1, not a great overtaking area, just that main straight, just a little bit too short, but you do have DRS there. Then you have the wonky straight between turns 3 and 5, and again, that having a good run through there, a good exit out of turn 5, is really important to getting a run on the car in front of you going into turn 7, which is one of the better overtaking spots around this lap. And again, another DRS zone there, and that's basically sector 1. Then sector 2, not really a whole lot of overtaking spots here. You have a 90 left, 90 right sequence, basically from turn 7 all the way to turn 10, where you used to have the Singapore sling chicane. Then you have that wonky turn 11, 12, cross that really short bridge, and then the kind of almost hairpin in turns 13. And those are basically your final corners through sector 2. Then you have the third DRS zone around the lap going into turn 14. Again, this straight's just a little bit too short. Usually can't really overtake here unless you have an absolutely abysmal exit out of turn 13. And that brings you to sector 3, turn 14. And with that removal of that kind of soccer stadium complex between what's now turn 15 and 16, you actually do have a small chance of making an overtake here into turn 16 before you get to that chicane of 16, 17, and then the two relatively fast corners of 18 and 19. That's basically a lap around the Marina Bay street circuit. It's a street circuit, obviously very bumpy, so teams like Alpine, which have struggled with bumpy tracks this year, expect them to do pretty horribly this weekend. It is a high downforce track, even with the removal of that soccer stadium, bus stop chicane-like complex. Is still very, very high downforce, basically very close to Monaco level loads on the front and rear wings. Unfortunately, straights, even though there are some parts of the track that are not quite as narrow as Monaco, the reality is that the straights are just too short, or they're just like a little bit crooked, like the two straights kind of between 5 and 7 and 14 and 16. So again, it's a little bit hard to kind of follow in the slipstream of the car that you're trying to overtake. So I would say this is probably the second most difficult track for overtaking. Only Monaco, I would say, is harder. So qualifying is going to be very, very important. So some additional stats about this track. It is 4.94 kilometers, and we're expected to have 62 laps on Sunday. The race lap record is a 134.486 set by Daniel Ricciardo last year. Again, that's a story we'll get into when we talk about last year's race. The average speed of that lap is 188 kilometers an hour, which is 23rd of the 24 tracks on this year's calendar. And this is a race that tends to run very, very close to the 2-hour mark. Last year was the first race actually in Singapore Grand Prix history, or at least a modern Singapore Grand Prix without a safety car. And it was also the fastest race. I think it was about an hour and 45 minutes. So it shows that even in a perfect race with no safety cars, yellow flags, it's still an hour 45. And again, with safety cars, it can get very close to 2 hours or even hit that 2-hour limit. Now, downforce rating 0.65 does seem a little bit low, but again, it's relative to Monaco. And again, teams will be doing close to their maximum downforce wings for both front and rear. Full throttle, 49%. So again, very much a stop-start race. And in the old days, this was pretty heavy, hard on fuel for fuel efficiency, but in recent years, that hasn't become much of an issue. And corner tendency, the calculation said it was medium, but it's actually just slow. A lot of those kinks count as corners, but not really. They're not true braking zones. So when you only factor in the braking zones, definitely a tendency between a lot of slow corners, but similar to Baku, but the main caveat being that Baku, you have to run low downforce settings. Here, it's going to be all about front, high downforce. Last thing I'll say about the track as well is that it is generally considered to be a bit of a rear limited circuit, a bit like Baku and Monza. So for drivers who tend to do a little bit better at those kinds of tracks like Norris, this is a track that should favor him in the inter-McLaren team battle this weekend. Now, pole to win conversion ratio is 70%, which is pretty high, but still 30% of the time the pole starter does not win. And often that's been through strategic mistakes. So, for example, safety car comes out at the wrong time, or just slight miscalculations there, or again, mechanical reliability might have an impact on that as well. Now, rookie out qualifying percentage 639%, which ranks 6 of the 24 tracks on this year's calendar, did seem a little bit high, just because this isn't a track that the junior categories run at, but it is a bit of a unique circuit, and again, it really requires a bit of a rhythm. And a bit like what we saw last time in Baku, there can be a little bit of jeopardy, random variability in qualifying, just with yellow flags, red flags, that sort of thing, and so that might create additional challenges, and again might mix up the order like we saw last time out. Now, safety car percentage is 94%. Last year, 2024 was actually the first year in modern history of the Singapore Grand Prix where there was no safety car. So in all likelihood, we'll probably have a safety car during the race, but again, you never know. And first race here, of course, was 2008, so almost 20 years ago, and that was obviously a pretty infamous race in terms of what happened during that Grand Prix. But again, this is a track that's not, I would say it's at this point, close to a modern classic. When you have conversations about, what track people want to kick off the calendar, even though this is a track that doesn't really produce great racing, this is a track that generally most people don't bring up as one we should lose off the calendar. I think it has its unique charm. It was the first night race, first, street circuit night race as well. So again, I think there's a bit of an originality to it. So again, most people are pretty content with it being on the F1 calendar. Now, tires for this weekend, soft C5, medium C4, hard C3. Pirelli, basically, after their experiment with the C6 tire this season, they basically dropped that tire for the rest of the season just because it's so unpredictable and it's not that much better than the C5. So instead, you're going to see C5 through to C3. I think the C3 will probably be a little bit hard, and the expectation is that I would say you're probably going to see a medium to hard one-stop race, but especially with the higher temperatures, you shouldn't have too much trouble getting the tires up to temperature here, unlike last couple weekends where the track temperature has been pretty cool. And yeah, one-stop race is pretty much a guarantee, although I saw some projections saying that it might be on the edge of a two-stop race, but really I think it's probably going to be a one-stop race this weekend. Now, weekend schedule, of course, Friday's already happened, so I'm just going to avoid that. Saturday from today onwards, FP3 at 5:30 p.m. local time and qualifying at 9 p.m. Temperature at the start of qualifying is expected to be about 28 degrees and partially cloudy. There is some chance of rain, I think, just with being in Southeast Asia in general. There's always, a rain cloud looking around the corner. So again, there is a mild possibility, I think, of rain either before the session, which would make things quite tricky, quite difficult, or during the session as well, and that goes for both Saturday and Sunday. Now for Sunday, of course, you just have the main Grand Prix, no Formula 2 this weekend, but you do have F1 Academy, and of course the Grand Prix will start at 8 p.m. sharp, and again, expected temperatures are pretty similar to Saturday, so 28 degrees, and again, partially cloudy. The one big talking point, of course, is that the FIA declared that this race was a potential heat hazard, which means that all the drivers either have to wear the heat vests that have been designed for this year. So far, the only time they've been used was George Russell in Bahrain, I believe, and there have been some complaints about the heat vests, about how the coolant basically stops working after 30 minutes to an hour, how it does kind of irritate the ribs because the tubing has to go around your ribs to kind of get to the heat back, cooling pack at the back. So again, it's not a perfect system, but the alternative is that you carry ballast. So it seems like most drivers are basically fine with using it for this week, as everyone will be on an even playing field. All right, now for last year's race, this of course was won by Lando Norris, Max Verstappen splitting the two Mercedes, and Piastri, recovering from a bit of a poor qualifying session to take that final spot on the podium. Now, for last year's race, of course, one of the big talking points was that going into the race weekend, it had basically been heavily rumored that this was going to be Ricciardo's last race in F1, but because of some kind of contractual reasons, either with Ricciardo himself or with the team sponsors, they could not publicly, say this while the weekend was still on. So we basically had this really awkward situation where kind of everyone knew that this was Ricciardo's last weekend, but we couldn't really, celebrate it or do anything, which was really a shame given that, Ricciardo, all things considered, had a pretty darn good F1 career. So in qualifying, a big shunt by Sainz for him that really left him on the back foot, and that was kind of one of the highlights of qualifying. So again, it'll be interesting to see if that happens again this year. Now for the race itself, it was not a particularly exciting race as Singapore tends to be. Norris generally controlled the pace in the front, Verstappen pretty good show in P3, and then I'm assuming Piastri, without even looking at the highlight package from last year, I'm assuming he got past, I believe it was Hamilton and Russell who were ahead of him, got past those two on strategy in the pit stop phase. Now the one big controversial moment from last year's race, of course, is that Racing Bulls basically to celebrate this try to celebrate Ricciardo's last race. They set him out on a set of soft tires right towards the end of the Grand Prix to go and do fastest lap. And coincidentally, fastest lap before Ricciardo went did this was Lando Norris. So effectively, they were taking a point off Norris. And of course, Racing Bulls being Red Bull's team, and this being something of a title fight between Norris and Verstappen last year, led to a whole lot of complaints from McLaren and a bunch of other individuals as well, and it basically contributed to the point for fastest lap being dropped for this year. So a bit of an interesting talking point there. I wish they could do the same for the sprint. Something happens in the sprint that affects the championship. A bunch of people get mad and we can drop the sprints too. Unfortunately, I think a man can dream, but probably won't happen. Now, and of course, you had the three drivers on the podium, like I mentioned before. Now, for Constructors' Championship permutations, of course, McLaren could have won the Constructors' Championship last time out. It was a bit of a long shot, that one, and given the disaster of a weekend that they had, they definitely came nowhere close to, getting the required points to get the Constructors' Championship, but the conditions are much more favorable this time out. So McLaren will win their 10th Constructors' Championship if they score at least 13 points this weekend. So they basically just need one driver on the podium, but again, given what they did last time out in Baku, it's definitely easier said than done. Now, for best qualifiers at this track historically, again, compared to the career averages, best is actually Yuki Tsunoda, but again, a bit of a small sample size given I think he's only done 3 Grand Prix here at Singapore, with a positive 17% compared to his average, and his median qualifying gap here is 2.2 tenths of a second in his favor. Now, number 2, Charles Leclerc plus 15%, and again, median qualifying gap about 2.2 tenths. And number 3 is Fernando Alonso plus 13%, but a median qualifying gap of 6.9 tenths of a second, which is pretty crazy given how many races Alonso's done here. That the fact that his median is that high suggests that he has an excellent feel around this track, and he's basically demolished his teammates at this track pretty much every year. Now, looking at worst qualifiers, number 1 is George Russell, minus 25% compared to his career average, but still on average does generally outqualify his teammate, median qualifying gap of negative 0.147. Number 2 is Esteban Ocon, not great for him, minus 10%, and a median qualifying gap of basically 4.5 tenths against him. And number 3 is Nico Hülkenberg, negative 8%, but still on average outqualifies his teammate with a median qualifying gap of 0.08 of a second. So taking a look at qualifying predictions for this weekend, the 10 drivers predicted to outqualify their teammates are Norris, Leclerc, Verstappen, Russell, Alonso, Gasly, Berman, Hadjar, Albon, and Bortoleto, which I believe are the exact same 10 drivers I predicted last time out. So you're kind of getting to the point of the season where there's not a ton of variation in the predictions, or it just seems that there's some tracks where it basically just it's the same from week to week. Now, taking a look, finally, predictions for this weekend. Of course, we do have the benefit of being able to see the FP1, FP2 results. So actually, before I reveal my predictions, let's just go over those results right now. I'll just do the top 5 for each of FP1 and FP2. So FP1 top 5 were Alonso, Leclerc, Verstappen, Hamilton, and Piastri. Bit of a surprise to see Alonso on top, but we know that they're a little bit better on these high downforce tracks. So not really a surprise to see Alonso, high up. But again, seeing him first is a little bit of a surprise. And then for FP2, the top 5 are, that is not the top 5. Where do we get the top 5 done? Let's see if we can get this loaded. No, it's not loading. Okay, well, the F1 app definitely needs some work then, if I can't even go and get the, let's try just closing the app and reopening it again, and we'll see if the times will show up for FP2. There we go. So the top 5 were Piastri, Hadjar, Verstappen, Alonso, and Norris. Just for reference, Stroll was in 6th as well, so it shows that Aston was performing very well. So it'll be interesting to see, I think, how things go this weekend. I think for me, it doesn't really change my predictions. I've kept mine the same from before basically for free practice. But my prediction is I think McLaren should do pretty well here. They should have a clean weekend. I think Verstappen's and Red Bull's resurgence is real though. So I'm basically actually being a bit of a particularly boring prediction, and I'm actually going to do Norris, Verstappen, and Piastri. It is a bit of a real limited circuit. Norris generally does pretty well at those. And it's been a pretty, not necessarily easy, but one of the easiest ways to choose between which McLaren driver is going to be best on any given weekend is if it's a rear limited track, pick Norris, and if it's a front limited track, pick Piastri, and that's been a pretty safe way to go this season. So I'm basically going to do that here, and I'm going to basically predict basically the same podium as last year. In terms of outside threats for the podium, I think Alonso having 2 FP free practice sessions in the top 4 should bode well. But of course, with his age, qualifying might be an issue, might not be able to nail the perfect lap. So again, that might be a struggle. Mercedes were kind of nowhere, but Russell crashed, so of course not representative there. And Ferrari have really struggled just kind of in general with qualifying, and that's not great around this track. So there you go. That's my preview for the 2025 Singapore Grand Prix. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.